Hey there, it's this guy again. I can't say how happy I am that you all enjoyed my last video. I was not expecting anyone, let alone you, to watch these videos. Seriously, I just thought this channel was gonna be me pretty much talking to myself the whole time. But with this video, well, I don't really know how to start it. I talk about this more in detail in my book, which you can also listen to on this channel, but now I'd like to talk about this in a different amount of detail. Okay, so I'm just going to start it. I think it was around May of 2020. I had these two best friends. Just in case they don't want me mentioning them, we'll call them Shmen and Schmishteen. Yeah. And not to toot our own horn, but the three of us were the funniest people we knew. We were always hanging out as much as we could. We all joked that our individual traumas were what made us so funny, and that's pretty true. But the three of us, in our own way, were all kind of battling our own depression. Myself at the time, not so much. I was more of a push it all down and ignore it kind of guy. But during the summer of 2020, just a month or two after lockdown started from COVID, my pushing everything down and ignoring it came back to haunt me. It manifested as this neediness and the inability to be alone with myself. I turned to my two friends, wanting to hang out every day in order to escape myself, but they both had their own problems, and they were both already dealing with their own depressions. It wasn't for them to have to be there for me just because I was having difficulty handling myself. And this change that began to take place within me, well, they didn't really like it. At the time, Schmishteen was off at college, and Shmen was doing his own thing, and didn't want to hang out as much as I wanted to. So, we ended up only hanging out a few days a week, where I would pick him up and just vent to him about everything that I had bottled up, all of my insanity that I was feeling at the time. Shmen was not a fan of this.
You stupid.
And eventually, sometime, I think in about 2021, Shmen and Schmishteen decided to block me on everything. The next few months were awful. I didn't have any friends. I didn't want any. I tried doing whatever I could to distract myself from this constant sinking feeling in my gut, this endless, sour weight that was always constricting me. I ended up dating anyone who would have me. At the time, I only dated men, but when I was with them, I just felt like I was around little boys. And to be fair, some of these guys were just awful. Manipulative, cheaters. This one guy had an obsession with ketchup. Oh my god, his whole house smelled like ketchup. It reeked. He'd just eat it straight off the plate with his finger. It was disgusting. And he was a dick. But I'm more upset about the ketchup, genuinely. Eventually, I found myself still alone, not wanting to date anyone. And instead, I would just sit inside every night and take edibles. I always had a really low tolerance to edibles, so I found that if I took a strong enough edible, I would just black out and forget everything that happened. And that seemed to work for me for a while, just completely ignoring the sinking pain I felt, completely shutting myself out from life. I would wake up, feel like death, think about how I wanted to kill myself, and then I would think, that means it's edible time, and just do that as a way of ignoring or not feeling anything. So I only ended up talking to people through video games and then just forget who they were the next day. Over time, I started to notice little changes about myself. I would go out to get food maybe once a day, and when I ordered, I would speak differently and use words I never normally used before. I became more awkward and self-conscious of everything around me, and I always would look back afterwards and think, why did I say that? Why did I talk like that? I don't talk like that. I thought about going back to Shmen and Schmistine and apologizing, but I didn't know what I'd say. Eventually, it got so bad that there was this one night in particular. I was sitting in my room, the edible had just started to kick in, and I thought, oh man, I really wish I had munchie snacks, but I can't go get them because I'm high, and I can't drive because I'm high. And then I blacked out, and when I woke up, I was in my car, just sitting there in my driveway with my car on and in park, and I got scared. And I thought, what the hell am I doing here? Oh my God, I can't be doing this. And I blacked out again, almost immediately. And when I came back, I was driving down the road. Luckily, I was still in my neighborhood, just 2 streets down from my house, and I thought, okay, oh my God, this is insane. I need to get back to my house. But right as I was looking for a place to turn around, a car showed up behind me. I got real paranoid real quickly. I wasn't paying attention and just turned onto the first street I could, hoping that they wouldn't follow me. Well, they did, because I was turning onto the street that exited onto the main road, and he was right behind me. I thought, okay, I'll just go out, turn the corner, and make my way back home. I knew where I was. I'd driven that exact road hundreds of times by this point, but when I pulled out onto the road and started speeding up to the speed limit, 40 miles an hour, I blacked out again. The next time I came to, I was 20 minutes further away than when I started, and sitting in the seat next to me was 5 boxes of cookies. 2 cookies were already gone. I didn't panic this time. I noticed I was going the speed limit. I wasn't swerving, so by this point, I was just more confused than anything. Every time, I just thought that all I could do was try to go home. So I kept trying to go home, and then I kept blacking out each time. The next time I came to, I was about 40 minutes away from my house on the interstate, going about 65, with a semi-truck right next to me. Scared the crap out of me. But I didn't swerve or anything. I just kept asking myself, where am I going? And then I blacked out again. And this time, I had sort of a dream, I think. I remember all I saw at first was blackness. And then in the distance, I saw this little white dot. And I heard this voice, one like I'd never heard before. I could only describe this voice as angelic. This was a woman's voice, and when they spoke, it sounded like 4 voices in one. And this voice said, "Let me show you something." And then this white light got just a little bit bigger. It became like a pinhole, just a tiny little peephole that I could see through. And I could see what looked like Shmen's bedroom. But I couldn't really tell exactly. But I could feel these feelings. It was like a tangled ball of all these mixed emotions. I felt confusion, I felt sadness, sort of, decay, frustration, and this feeling that felt kind of like regret, just a little bit. And then I heard their voices, Shmen and Schmistine, and they were moaning. and they were having sex. I couldn't see as much as I could feel, and I could hear a little bit, but it was around this time that this pinhole kind of started to fade into grayness. But the light got brighter and brighter and bigger until I couldn't see anything, and it sort of blocked out my hearing too, and then the vision just faded. And all of a sudden, I woke up, and I was sitting in my car, parked on the side of the road, and up ahead of me were the high beams of a pickup truck. The truck passed, and I was just sitting there. It was dark, about 4:30 a.m., I think. There was no noise around me until I just yelled, "Fuck it! If Schmen and Schmichteen get to fuck, then I get to say fuck it too." I was a little angry. I started my car, and I thought to myself, for the rest of the night, I refuse to feel bad about myself. I'll go back to hating myself when the sun rises. So I drove. And this time, I didn't black out. I actually think this was about when the edible had started to wear off, but, you can still feel that fuzziness, I guess. It doesn't matter. I drove past my neighborhood, now going the opposite way of the direction I'd been going all night. I drove downtown, where there was this road that wound up the side of a mountain, and all along this road were these nice houses. It was the foothills where all the rich people lived, and as I drove, I hit shuffle on my music, and this song came on, one that I had never heard before. I had downloaded an album from this indie artist I liked, but I'd never listened to this one particular song. It's the song you're hearing now, called Up, reprised. As it played, I started winding up this mountain road. The sun was coming up, rising to my right, glazing the tops of the trees and the city I'd grown up in sunlight. There was actually a herd of deer grazing on the side of the road. It was beautiful. I don't think I had ever experienced such beauty in my entire life. I'd driven up this road before because at the very top there was a parking lot where you could hike the rest of the way up the backside of this plateau. But eventually, before I reached that area, I got to a gate, one that had never been there before. Apparently, within the past year, somebody had bought the top of the mountain and had installed a gate that only opened at certain times. I wasn't exactly upset when I saw this gate, but I just thought it sucked that somebody put it there. I rolled up to it. My window was already rolled down, I think. I heard over the speaker box, "Please present key card or ID." So, I did the only thing I could do. I yelled, "Fuck!" as loud as I could, and then I turned around and went home, and went back to hating myself. But this time, just a little bit less. Over the next few months, it went from way bad to way worse. I was still taking edibles every night, blacking out, still depressed, still losing all sense of myself and who I was. One day, an old friend of mine from high school hit me up and asked if she could take me out to a cool spot. This particular friend, we'll call her Schmarley. Schmarley knew that I hadn't left the house in probably a month. We kept in touch. She asked if I wanted to take an edible, and she could take me to this cool spot down by the river. I said yes. I didn't like myself at all, but I liked Schmarley. She was cool, and she'd always been there for me. So that day, around 11 a.m., she came and got me. We went to this guy's house, got some edibles, took them, and then she surprised me by taking me to the house of another old friend that I hadn't seen in a while. We'll call her... No, not what you were thinking. That would be too obvious. We'll call her Ted Arison. Yeah, that sounds good. I was actually really baffled when I saw Ted Arison after 2 years. They used to be the lightest, most vibrant person in the room, always wearing pretty light colors. They had blonde hair, dressed in skirts and such. And when I saw them this time, they were completely different. Entirely dressed in black, face piercings, makeup. Imagine just My Chemical Romance. That's all you really need. But they looked great. It was a surprise, but it was cool. That detail isn't really important at all. It's just nice to know how quickly and drastically we can all make changes in our lives. They were still the same funny, kind, vibrant person they were, just goth now. Which again, unimportant, but cool. Anyways, I promise I'm almost done. I won't take up too much more of your time. I'm sure you've got other, more short-form content to consume. So, we started heading for wherever Schmarley was taking us. Ted Arison in the passenger seat and me in the back. I was kind of just sitting there, looking out the window, leaning against the door, already super high, by the way, and something happened. That has never happened to me before or since that day. As I was sitting there, Schmarley started playing this song through her car speakers. It was either Lady Gaga or Britney Spears or something. I can't remember, but it was something in that genre. And they got really excited when it came on, and they started bouncing up and down to it, pumping their fists and such. I could feel them still bouncing and shaking the whole car, but the music started to fade out into silence. And then this other song started playing. A song I had also never heard before. I tried to look over, and I was going to say, "Hey, why'd you change the music?" But that was when I realized I couldn't move my body at all. I was completely frozen. My head was stuck in place. I glanced over, and just barely out of the corner of my eye, I could still see Schmarley and Ted Arison car dancing and pumping their fists to the song that was playing before. It was still playing, I just couldn't hear it at all. I started to panic a little bit. My heart started racing. And then I got distracted because this song that I was hearing was just so beautiful. It was so melodic. And as I sat there, frozen, staring out the window, I noticed on all the people walking by, there started appearing these little flashes of light. Just tiny little sparks of white light. But then these flashes started getting bigger and bigger and kept slowly growing until eventually one flash covered an entire person. And when the flash stopped, it wasn't the same person, but instead, where they were and doing what they were doing, but now looking at me, was someone wearing a completely green or blue suit with little white motion capture balls on them. More people began to flash, and when they did, some of them were holding these giant TV cameras and pointing them at me. A car drove up beside us, and inside was a mother, father, and 2 or maybe 3 kids. And when they flashed, the whole car was gone. And all of them became these green-suited motion capture people, and instead, where each window was, there was a giant camera pointed at me. And this song was still playing. All of a sudden, it sounded like there were footsteps, like playing in my mind. Like I could hear someone far away. It sounded like they were walking into a room full of people, and then it all got quiet. And I heard a man's voice say, "This is the part where he figures it out." Figures what out? What the fuck is happening? And then I heard, "This will come at a terrible cost." I got scared, but I couldn't move. For the rest of the drive, all I could see were these flashes and the people all around me holding these massive cameras, and all I could hear was this music. Eventually, I felt the car stop. Schmarly and Ted Arison got out, and when Schmarly opened my door, I fell out onto the sidewalk. I caught myself with my hands, and that was when, all of a sudden, I could move again. Schmarly and Ted just laughed it off, saying how high I was and making me wear sunglasses. Everything seemed fine, kind of. So I thought that maybe I had just fallen asleep or something and not known it. I got up, pretended everything was fine, pretended I was fine, figuring I was just high out of my mind, and we started walking. We had to jump a fence and go off this little trail, but we got there, and there was this absolutely gorgeous sight. There was what looked like a kind of man-made dugout island. It was perfectly square, with a tree right in the middle. Right next to it was the river that ran right through downtown, and along the riverbank was a bunch of these little stones, all stacked on top of each other. The way they were stacked, they all kind of looked like a city, and it was really cool. As I stood there, admiring the landscape and feeling nothing but pure bliss and beauty, this song came back on. The same song from before, and this time it started in the middle. And it felt like I was hearing it all around me. And I remember looking around, and that was about the last thing I can remember before I think I just blacked out. Because all I remember next is winding up back home. Schmarly dropped me off. It was only about 2 or maybe 3 p.m. I went inside and stood in my room looking at a noose that I had tied to my ceiling fan months ago, wanting to kill myself, but knowing that the ceiling fan wouldn't hold my weight. I stood there for a second, just a second, and I looked down to check my phone, and all of a sudden, it was 8 p.m. I thought I was insane, so I looked out my window, and everything was dark. And then out of nowhere, absolutely nowhere, I felt my walls start screaming at me. Like, it felt like my room was suddenly just full of demons that were yelling at me to either kill myself or kill people or to blow something up or threaten people. Just everything bad that you could ever possibly think of to be done, they were screaming at me to do. I ran out of my room and it stopped instantly. I thought I was just going crazy. So I decided to go into the room where my computer was and play some video games to maybe calm down, relax, get my head straight, whatever. I played video games for a few hours, and it was fine. All of my online friends then eventually went to bed, so I just sat there, staring at my computer home screen for a second. And that was when all of these terrible screeching voices came flooding back. My body, all of a sudden, felt so cold. I started shivering, like really bad. It felt like all of the heat in my body just got sucked out through my toes. I ran into my room and got in bed, and I put about 3 layers of blankets on, and I was still freezing. So I put on a sweater and a jacket, and that still wasn't doing anything. I started shaking so badly and uncontrollably that my wooden bed frame started thumping against the wall. I didn't want my parents to hear. I didn't want them to come in and find me like how I was. And I didn't want to be in that room anymore. So I got in my car and I drove downtown, where my parents had an apartment that they were remodeling to sell. The shaking was so bad I could barely calm it down enough to control my car. I got there at about 2-ish in the morning and lied on the couch for the entire rest of the night, shaking uncontrollably. I wrote a draft of my will, certain that I was going to die. I watched the sun come up, and soon after that, the shaking eventually stopped, and I fell asleep. I didn't know what this was. I didn't know if it would ever happen again, but I knew I couldn't tell my parents. I mean, there's only one kind of place that you can go for something like that, and I knew that that wasn't the answer. The shaking stopped, and for the rest of the day, I was fine. I went home and found out then that I was entirely out of edibles. But after what had just happened, I thought that might be a good thing. The next day, I decided to go back down to the apartment. On my way there, I started shaking again. So bad this time that I had to pull over and sit there for 30 minutes with the heat on full blast until they subsided. Once it did, then I continued on. That night, the shakes came back, and once again, I spent the night downtown, waiting for the sun to come up, fully believing that this was the night I was going to die. The next day, they happened again. My memory of these 3 days in particular is almost gone at the time of writing this, but I remember that the third night at this apartment, a third draft of my will, and a third time I was certain I was never going to wake up if I fell asleep, I got so tired of this. I was already so tired in general. I don't exactly remember what the events of this day were like, but all I can remember is the next day, standing in my room, when these malicious voices came back, screaming terrible, awful things at me, telling me to commit acts of terror and the like. And then, all of a sudden, I heard a different voice. A voice that sounded like music, but wasn't music. This voice was angelic, and sounded kind of like the same sort of female voice from before. They spoke, but I couldn't understand what they said. But I could feel something. Like, I could almost understand what they said. Not through listening, but through feeling. And then this voice spoke again. This time, asking me a question. I didn't understand what they said, but I just out loud said, yes. I then jumped into bed, shivering and shaking, thinking to myself that I just wanted this to be over, that I just wanted everything to end. I wanted me to end. I wanted to die, but I couldn't find the strength to kill myself, so I just wanted to end. I looked around my room, and in that moment, all of these shadowy figures appeared, surrounding me and covering my walls from top to bottom. Figures made out of shadows stacked on top of each other, all around me. So I just started speaking. Just out into the air, I said, kill me. Please, God, kill me. If there's a God, then please just kill me. Take me out. 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 And in that moment, I felt something. I remember sort of feeling like this loss of connection, this loss of feeling, this loss of caring about anything. And then I felt a physical sensation. I felt in the back of my brain, it felt like something snapped, but also connected at the same time. I immediately saw tunnels, like I was moving really fast through these tunnels that looked like they were being carved through dirt. And then with every turn and curve, I felt a new area of my mind light up with sensation. And then I saw this. And there was this music, this ethereal music that I couldn't even explain, or recreate ever in my wildest dreams. I saw this close up at first, and then I saw these other orbs close up that looked like the sun. And when I saw them, I knew. Just by seeing them, I knew. Seeing them was experiencing them, and I could tell that these were powers beyond reality. The two I saw were chaos and order, revolving around each other in perfect synchronicity, a perfect balance. In that moment, I believe my consciousness left my body, and I went, well, everywhere. There are some parts of this that I can't tell you, and other parts I think I can. I saw the nature of these forces beyond our universe and how their function translated directly to inform the way everything functions in this world. I experienced reincarnation over and over again, and in doing so, I learned that there are forces of the emotions we feel, that there are the truest versions of the emotions we feel, and that what we feel as emotions is only our biological forms manifesting ways to translate the nature of these truths to us. Everything is a spectrum. Some forces we can feel almost directly as emotions and sensations, other forces not so much. Instead, manifesting the paths we all go down. The moments we experience, each instance in this world being an incarnation of how all of these forces interact and come together, and how we interact with them in each moment. Going through and experiencing our choices in each moment as our choices themselves become a part of the spectrum of every way these forces can be expressed. Everything is an expression of truth that has no set form, no set way of being, and is thus always being through everything. I remember having visions of being butterflies, plants, animals, people, even worms, which is awful, by the way. I learned that experience and meaning are why we are all here, and that in everything we do and in everything we experience, we are a part of a delicate dance of balance. From the birth of stars, to the formation of planets, to the evolution of life, and the creation of societies, everything is a translation and a form through which the truth exists and expresses, patterns repeating over and over and over, but each time creating changes elsewhere. Everything I saw is maybe too much to tell you here, and too complicated for me to explain just yet. And that is why this will always be everything I need to tell you. Each time I experienced death, I would come back to this sort of place outside reality, where I would communicate in a way with, well, I don't really know what or who exactly, but when I did, each time I died, I would immediately understand the true nature of the feelings I had and the being I held in the past life that I lived. If I was a person with anger issues, I would immediately understand the truth behind what anger was, and that anger was only mental, and that there was never actually ever any reason to be angry. Anger only exists as an obstacle for us to learn how to get over. If I was a sad or anxious person, I would realize that sadness and anxiety are only there when we stop understanding the balance of the good that exists in the world, and how anxiety is only a byproduct of self-doubt and not truly letting yourself live in each moment. There is no need to fear our mistakes when in truth, there is no such thing as mistake. No plate is ever actually broken. Everything that is in its rightful place. We can commit harmful acts, but when we do so, we only do so out of a lack of understanding. And when we do, the universe will act in opposition to balance everything out. We are only ever acted negatively upon to show us what we do not know. We are only ever brought to places of dismay or anguish so that we can learn something. It was after what felt like a very long time. Like, beyond infinitely long. Which doesn't make sense now, but maybe might later. Anyways, one of these times after I died, I realized that I missed my mom. The only person who I ever loved and who I loved more than anything. And I think that wherever I was could sort of sense this. And in a language that wasn't spoken or heard, I was asked if I was ready to return home. I knew that that was the right thing to do, was to come back and finish my life out here on Earth. But I knew that just like when you get reincarnated, you forget everything that you didn't experience in that life. But I knew that that was okay. That was supposed to happen. And I knew why. So once again, I said yes. And then, almost instantly, I woke up. I shot up in my bed. It was around the same time. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning. Only about 5 or 10 minutes had passed. And I gasped uncontrollably, and I said out loud, "The meaning of life is to give life meaning." And I said it because I knew this was true, like a fact. Because I didn't come up with this, I had learned this from somewhere. I knew this was true because I knew it was a paradox. I knew it was the right answer because it was balanced. I looked around my room, and all of the shadows were gone. There were no voices. They had all completely stopped. And everything felt lighter. I knew I was supposed to forget everything I had seen, but I hadn't. I thought back to what I had just experienced, and I realized I was forgetting. I had already forgotten almost every life that I had seen, but I could still so vividly remember these forces that were there, and how their being and their movements all translated to truths of nature everywhere else. So I took out my phone, and on a notepad, I just started writing. Everything I could, anything I could remember. I wrote until the sun came up. But I didn't have the words to describe or articulate any of what I had just seen. There were no words in any human language, and certainly not English, that could describe any of what I had experienced. I wrote for hours, but when I tried to describe these forces and laws and everything, all I could write was water trickling down chains, the rise and fall of ocean tides, rivers, trees, humanity, all of history. Everything has meaning. Everything contains an energy that is not physical, that is not detectable, and does not exist directly in this universe. Everything is a spectrum. Truth expresses through nature. It was very hard, exhausting even. But I only took breaks from writing to try and Google words that might maybe fit what I was trying to talk about. Eventually, I started to forget more and more. And soon enough, all I could remember were a handful of details about my experience. When the sun came up, I thought I'd go for a drive. And when I did, everything I saw was outlined in this yellow light. The hills, the trees, the buildings all had this thick layer of yellow light outlining them, tracing their shape. And when I drove down the road, I could see people on the sidewalk, and they all had different colors. Colors I could kind of see, but mostly felt. Some people were red, others were blue, a lot of people were yellow, green, or brown, and each time I saw their colors, I could tell it was a different sort of indication of who they were. It was like their aura. I could tell what kind of animals they preferred, or what they might say or do in certain situations, and other just random stuff about them, I guess. But I had no way of knowing if I was actually right about any of it. So I just kind of let it go. Eventually, I stopped by the local coffee shop I always went to. And while I was in the drive-thru, I looked down at a pothole that was filled with this light. I could see, just from looking at it, every deer that once walked there when it was just grass, every footstep, every tire track, every earthquake and freeze-over and lazy construction worker that had to be in order for that pothole to be right there, exactly where it needed to be. Since then, I've thought many times that what happened to me was just a dream or some kind of schizophrenic delusion. But every time afterwards, something happens that makes me remember that what's happening around me is just the nature of the expression of truth. I see how the truths of what love is and what anger is translate and affect other people based on how they interact with the wholeness of that truth. I've been able to ask people questions and see what kind of truths they're aligned with and which ones they are misunderstanding. And then, from that, been able to accurately predict how the next day will be for them based on this. I can predict when people will have more chaos in their life or when they will have more order, when they will go up or when they will go down. At least, I used to. I knew that I needed to do this, what I'm doing, when I realized I could help people. Whether true or not, whatever happened to me gave me an insight and an understanding that can be used to help people, but no more than they are willing to help themselves. There is a lot to still understand here, and everything I still have left to tell you. Every day I wake up and forget some truths and remember others. I still make mistakes. I'm just more aware of what's going on when I make them. It is in this that I ask you to just bear with me. At the time of writing this, it's been almost 5 years since that day. So much has happened to me, and I've forgotten and remembered so much else. It is in this that I will always try to be accurate, and I will always try to be truthful. But I ask you to take all of this with a grain of salt, until you can figure out the truth for yourself. I may argue with people online. I have to hold myself to what I know, but I will never try to lead you astray. I'll never ask you for money. I'll never tell you that I have access to information that you don't. If I'm right about what I saw, then we all have access to these truths. We just have to align ourselves with the truth. Strip away the falsities we cover ourselves with, accept ourselves, and accept what we cannot change, and be as skeptical of the truth as we are ready to learn it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know a lot of you are really horny for me to get into my concepts and explanations of what I understand to be the truth, but I had to get this video up there first, so that you can all better understand where I'm coming from. And now, after hearing this, I believe you are ready to hear the rest of what I have to tell you, which is everything. I've been your whatever this is I'm doing, Carpenter. If you like this video, thanks.